Updated news, Luigi Mangione legal update. Tonight, we bring you an important legal development in one of America's most closely watched criminal cases, the case of Luigi Mangione, accused of the December 2024 killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. In a Manhattan courtroom earlier today, a judge dismissed two of the most serious charges against Mangione, but much remains at stake. This is where things stand now. Who is Luigi Mangione, and what's the case about? Luigi Mangione is a 27-year-old man educated at an Ivy League college, facing both state and federal charges in connection with the December 4th, 2024 shooting death of Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare. The allegations against him are serious: murder, weapons charges, and in some counts, terrorism-related charges. Prosecutors say Mangione not only intended to kill Thompson, but that the act was ideologically motivated, a protest driven by animus toward the healthcare or insurance industry. He was arrested after a multi-state manhunt, including in Altoona, Pennsylvania, indicted in New York State, and also charged federally. State versus federal prosecution and what terrorism charges mean. The complexity of Mangione's case comes from the fact that there are multiple charges under different jurisdictions: state, New York, and federal. Some charges carry the possibility of the death penalty in federal court. State charges include murder, weapons possession, and others. One of the key issues in debate has been whether the killing qualifies under New York State's terrorism statute. Under that statute, for a murder to be considered terrorism in the state, prosecutors must show more than just killing motivated by ideology or discontent. They must prove the defendant intended to intimidate, coerce, or influence public policy, or a civilian population. Without those elements, the statute's terrorism enhancements cannot stand. What happened today? Charges dropped. On September 16, 2025, at the New York State Supreme Court, Justice Gregory Caro issued a ruling that delivered a partial win for Mangione. The Guardian. Two of the top state charges were dismissed. First-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism under state law. Second-degree murder as a crime of terrorism under state law. The judge found that the evidence presented to the grand jury was legally insufficient to support these terrorism enhancements. Specifically, the prosecution did not satisfy the legal requirement to show that Mangione intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or that public policy was targeted. Ideological motive alone was not enough under the law. What charges remain? Although these two charges were dismissed, several substantial charges remain. Second-degree murder under state law is still on the table. This is a serious charge and carries penalties under New York law that can include decades, up to life in prison. Other state charges besides murder also remain: weapons possession and related counts. Federal charges still loom, including charges that could lead to the death penalty if conviction is secured in the federal case. Legal arguments and defense position. Mangione's defense has been pushing several arguments. One is that the state and federal prosecutions amount to double jeopardy, being tried by different sovereigns, state versus federal, for essentially the same act. Although double jeopardy protections in U.S. law normally prevent being tried twice for the same crime, separate sovereigns doctrine allows both state and federal prosecutions under separate laws. Justice Caro declared that the double jeopardy argument was premature since neither case had gone to trial yet. Defense also argued that the terrorism enhancements and motivations are legally vague or improperly applied, that ideological motive alone doesn't satisfy legal definitions of terrorism under the state law unless coupled with intent to influence public policy or instill fear in a population. This was central in what led to the judge dismissing those terrorism murder charges. Implications of today's ruling. So what does this mean? First, Mangione's worst possible state sentence is reduced by the dismissal of those top state charges. The state case will no longer include first-degree murder as a terrorism crime, which in New York could have carried life without parole. Those possibilities are shifted or removed, depending on what convictions may remain. Second, the ruling underlines that terrorism statutes are not a catch-all. Courts require strict legal elements, not just motive or ideology. In this case, the line between political/ideological anger and legal terrorism is key, and Justice Caro found the prosecution did not cross it for those specific charges. Third, despite the dismissal, Mangione still faces many serious charges. The legal battle is far from over. The prosecution has multiple counts still active, both at state level and federal level, some of which carry extremely severe penalties. Fourth, the ruling may affect strategy. With the highest charges gone, prosecutors may focus more sharply on the remaining state murder charge and strengthening the federal case. Defense may want to press for excluding certain evidence, scrutinize grand jury findings, and challenge admissibility of statements, the notebook, weapons evidence. What's next? Court calendar and expected proceedings. Here is what comes next. A pretrial hearing in the New York State case is scheduled for December 1st, 2025. The Guardian. In parallel, the federal case continues, with Mangione also expected to appear in federal court and potential trial proceedings there. Some federal charges carry the possibility of the death penalty. Defense is likely to file further motions to challenge evidence, perhaps to suppress specific items such as statements, writings, or items seized during arrest. They may also argue for delays or strategic scheduling to avoid problematic overlaps between state and federal cases. Broader context and public reaction. This case has already drawn substantial public attention. Mangione has become something of a polarizing figure. Supporters view him as a protest figure, someone taking on the health insurance or healthcare system. Critics see a dangerous boundary crossed, violence with political or ideological undertones. Media outlets, legal experts, civil libertarians are watching closely. The decision to charge under terrorism statutes, especially in state court, is relatively rare and controversial, one that forces courts to define the boundary between criminal act and act of terror under state law. The rulings today may also have ripple effects. How state prosecutors choose to pursue terrorism enhancements in future cases, how courts interpret intention to coerce or intimidate a population under similar laws. Remaining risks and defense challenges. Even with 2 major charges dropped, Mangione faces heavy legal risks. The second-degree murder charge still could lead to many years, up to life in prison under state law. Federal prosecution with death penalty potential remains. If convicted under federal law, the consequences could be the gravest possible in the U.S. legal system. The strength of evidence prosecutors have presented includes writings, surveillance, possible motive, and associations. Defense must contend with that. Legal procedural concerns, suppressing evidence, challenge to the federal-state overlap, questions of self-incrimination, and how to defend in both jurisdictions without compromising strategy. Reflection and closing thoughts. Luigi Mangione's partial legal victory today is significant. It demonstrates how even strong charges can be pared back when legal definitions are precise, especially in the domain of terrorism under state law. But it's only one chapter in what promises to be a long, complex story. The danger now is that public perception expects the case to be over, when in truth, much of the prosecutorial machinery remains fully operational. What this case asks of us, as listeners, citizens, observers, is, how do our laws define terrorism? How do we balance ideological motive and criminal accountability? Can a state treat certain murders as terrorism when the line of intent is blurred? The stakes are high, life or death for Mangione under federal law, decades in prison under state law, the broader principle of what terrorism means in courts, and the societal tension over political violence or extremism in ideology. That concludes tonight's update on Luigi Mangione. We'll continue to follow all developments, state and federal proceedings, court filings, legal motions, and bring you updated stories as they unfold. You've been listening to Voice Only Crime Stories. If you found this episode informative, consider subscribing so you never miss a break in these major cases. Thank you for listening. This is Blissful Little Life YouTube channel, and subscribe for more voice-only crime stories every week. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and never stop asking questions.